So thank you for joining us tonight for the Christofferson Center's Book Club and Speaker Series at the Frontline of Change, Positive Acts in Planning. I'm Gretchen Worth. I'm the project director of the Susan Christofferson Center for Community Planning, the organizer of this series. The Christofferson Center works across New York State to support communities in planning for a more equitable, climate-resilient built environment. We've introduced this series as a way to offer a conversation around New York State challenges and opportunities in the planning space. Tonight's conversation is informed by a book entitled Poverty by America, published earlier this year. It's written by Matthew Desmond, who won the Pulitzer Prize for an earlier book, Evicted. In Poverty by America, Desmond examines how and why one of the world's wealthiest countries, the United States of America, has such deeply entrenched poverty. And it's okay if you haven't read it, but we highly recommend it. As you may know, the poverty rate increased in the US in 2022 for the first time in 13 years, up to 12.4% nationally. That's a 5% increase over 2021. In New York State, according to the state comptroller, almost 2.7 million New Yorkers, or 13.9% of the state's population, lived in poverty in 2021, meaning our poverty rate here in New York State is higher than the national average. So to discuss this topic tonight, I'm delighted to welcome our speaker and moderator. Dawn Wells-Clyburn is the executive director of Push Buffalo, People United for Sustainable Housing. Dawn stepped into that role in January 2023 after 9 years with the organization. In her previous post as deputy director, Dawn oversaw the organization's day-to-day operations and strategic direction for Push's weatherization program, sustainability and clean energy initiatives, advocacy on public policy related to climate and housing justice, and other social issues facing frontline communities in Buffalo. Having brought a generation of experience to Push with financial and management information systems, Dawn led one of the most critical infrastructure updates in the organization's history, playing a significant role in the development of the finance department. This work provided the supportive framework needed to strengthen several initiatives, including Hiring Hall, Push's signature workforce development social enterprise. Dawn also serves as executive director of Buffalo Neighborhood Stabilization Committee, or Company, Push's affordable housing development entity. Over the past several years, Dawn has played an integral role in moving forward the West Side Homes project, an award-winning 49-unit zero-emission, affordable and supportive rental housing development project on the west side of Buffalo. Under Dawn's leadership, West Side Homes broke ground in 2022 and is scheduled for completion later this year. Derek Crossman, an advisory board member of the Christofferson Center, is the newly minted deputy director of Empire State Development for the Mohawk Valley. Prior to this, he worked as the principal planner for the City of Utica, where he participated in a wide range of city and collaborative initiatives related to economic development, community development, equity, housing, zoning, vacancy, transportation, and public art. Derek received his master's degree in regional planning at the University at SUNY Albany and a bachelor's in politics from Ithaca College. So for everyone joining us tonight, we will keep this event to an hour. So the first half includes some further explanation and sharing from Dawn about Push Buffalo's work. And then we'll move on to a conversation between Dawn and Derek to hear their takeaways from the book. And then in the second half of the program, we'll talk more generally and more specifically about poverty in New York State. So we hope you'll participate in that part of the event with your questions and comments. So put them into the chat function as we go along. You can, as we get to that part later in the program, raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And we'll incorporate as many of your comments and questions about the book, about the conversation, about perhaps topics that haven't been raised tonight as we can. So before we start, a couple of other housekeeping details. Please keep yourselves muted so everyone can hear the conversation. We are recording the event and we'll share that out to everyone who's registered. And our next book event is around the book, A History of Native American Land Rights in Upstate New York. And that's scheduled for Monday, December 6th at 5:30 p.m. This book was published in 2016, but the focus, of course, remains highly relevant across the state nearly 8 years later. So you can sign up at christoffersoncenter.org, and we hope you'll join us for that event in December. So, although we're joined by people from across and beyond New York State tonight, I'm based in Ithaca and would like to acknowledge that Ithaca is on the traditional homelands of the Gaeacahono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gaeacahono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Ithaca, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gaeacahono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gaeacahono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. So with that, I will turn it over, Dawn, to you to talk a little bit more about Push Buffalo and the work that you're doing there and how that flows into tonight's conversation around poverty that you and Derek will be having.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. I'm really happy to be here with you this evening, everyone. And hello again, Derek. Really excited about this conversation because the work that Push is doing is very intersectional work. I have been, with this organization for over a decade, and how I came into this work was really based off of need, right? Like I come into this work, and many of us come into this work as participants and victims of the system. I mean, reading through the book Evicted, reading through this book, Poverty by America, at times can be was very triggering to some degree, and also validating. At Push Buffalo, we believe that, real people have real power. We know what we want where we live. We deserve a seat at the table, and we believe in turning our neighborhoods around, by our own hand in community with other folks. And, those beliefs are centered squarely in our mission to mobilize residents to create strong neighborhoods and quality affordable housing, to expand local hiring opportunities, and to advance racial, economic, and environmental justice. Push started in 2005 with the goal of really addressing a neglect in the urban structure here on the west side of Buffalo. Gretchen mentioned that New York State is a home to some of the oldest housing stock in the country, but in Buffalo, not only are we, I believe at this point, we're the 6th poorest city in the country. We also have some of the oldest housing stock, not only in New York State, but in the country. And that's been problematic for some time. But how we started in this work was just really trying to address the zombie homes, the neglect from the mortgage crisis, and just taking it house by house, block by block. And it really grew into from a grassroots movement. From a desire from folks like me and other folks to really be able to expand our power and to really do something about our neighborhood. And we were able to organize folks across the city and across the state into having our first campaign. And slowly over time, we were able to acquire land, vacant homes that had been left from the Pataki administration. And over time, we were able to carve our path into affordable housing to be able to take control of that speculative market that was destroying our neighborhoods. And so by 2007, we had a fully trained group of people that we brought together as the first community planning Congress. And what I mean by community planning Congress kind of goes back to the belief system that we ascribe to, that we have power, we deserve a seat at the table. And a lot of that is grounded and rooted in our theories of change. We believe in a just transition. We believe in the theories of feminine ethic of care, that nothing is separate from the other. And with the just transition framework, it's really talking about bringing coming out of an extractive economy into a regenerative economy. And that holistic approach really touches to every sector of the work that we do, from organizing our community and centering them through a community Congress. They tell us, the people impacted, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, where I'm focusing on, like, how do we empower, how do we empower folks? They tell us what projects we should pursue, what campaigns are most important, where they're seeing the problems. And I think here at Push, what we're able to accomplish is because we are listening to the people, and they are being empowered in order to promote change. I'll stop right there, Gretchen. I don't know if you want to kind of get into some more of the meat of the matter, but I'm hoping that that's a good enough introduction to our approach and how we work at Push.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dawn. So then to kick off the actual conversation about the book, I wanted to start us off with a quote from the early part of the book. And so this says that Desmond says, poverty is often material scarcity piled on chronic pain, piled on incarceration, piled on depression, piled on addiction, on and on it goes. Poverty isn't a line. It's a tight knot of social maladies. It is connected to every social problem we care about: crime, health, education, housing. And its persistence in American life means that millions of families are denied safety and security and dignity in one of the richest nations in the history of the world. And I'm sharing that because this goes really to the heart of the matter that Derek and Dawn and I have been talking about in our prior conversations about the book. And just that traditionally poverty has been seen, the view of poverty, the solutions to poverty in a more traditional way have been very siloed. So it's about the unhoused, it's about the addicted, it's about the incarcerated and now non-incarcerated people coming out of our prisons, and so many of our views, so many of our alternatives, so many of our solutions have been siloed rather than looking at poverty as a holistic issue that is so intertwined and so intersectional. And so that has just gotten to the heart of a lot of what Dawn and Derek have talked about previously. And so I wanted to pass that now over to the both of you as kind of a kickoff to then start talking about the book itself, Poverty by America.
Oh, thank you, Gretchen. Also, thank you for the kind introduction. And Dawn, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, as well as everybody who's participating tonight. This quote it does get to the crux of the issue. And I think one of the first takeaways I had when reading this book is that poverty doesn't impact just one aspect of life, right? Throughout the book, Desmond walks us through how pervasive, entrenched, and compounding the effects of poverty can be on individuals and families. It weighs you down and it pulls you down. And it affects everything: access to fresh, high-quality foods, the ability to get reliably to and from work and to hold down a job, the ability to weather an unexpected health emergency. And at the same time, it also puts folks into greater proximity to environmental and public health hazards and away from the public goods and the resources that they need. And I think we need to understand that as practitioners and people in the communities trying to alleviate these issues, we need to understand just how pervasive and how all-encompassing poverty can be.
Thank you, Derek. That's exactly on point. As I was saying, the holistic nature of the problem and how Matthew Desmond kind of brings these things out to the forefront, I think is really telling. It's telling a story that many folks have experienced firsthand, including myself. I know what it is to have, I know what it is not to have. And it's really a matter, I think something that really stuck out to me was the entire definition of poverty, right? And how we've approached it historically as a society is really lopsided. It's really like tunnel vision. And I think if we can really get a grip on what poverty is and what it means to the people who are suffering from it. For example, would he mention that, poverty as pain? What is poverty? Poverty is pain. Poverty is fear. Poverty is shame, sickness. So we don't typically think of poverty in those, as being those things, as being described as that, right? We think of poverty as like a lack of money. And it's really ironic to me to think of poverty as a lack of money in a society where we have an abundance, right? And so that mentality of scarcity is something that has permeated throughout all of our societies, all of our cultures, that there's not enough. There's just not enough when there's actually more than enough. And I also think that it was really important where he was speaking about, just like describing what poverty is. It really comes down to a core thing that I have seen in my work, that I have experienced, and that's dignity. The right to have dignity, and that in itself is wealth. I've seen people who didn't have really much, and I've experienced, situations where I haven't had that much, but if we had our basic needs met, if we were able to, in different times in my life, if I was able to have access and I was able to maintain my dignity, that meant a lot. And I think the systems, when I think about this book and threaded all throughout is just this systemic issue that we're facing with poverty and how housing is really at the core, at the front and center, like especially when you think about climate change, when you think about, or the climate crisis, that's really what it is. And seeing all of the barriers to having dignity, that's what I'm going to call it, to having dignity, at the core of that is just justice, environmental justice. You can't talk about environmental justice without talking about housing justice. You can't talk about housing justice without talking about racial justice and equity, not even equality, equity. What does it mean to have access? What does it mean to have a home that not only is, safe and secure, but safe and secure for the person that is living in it, as opposed to what someone else defines as safe and secure, right? If I have a house and it has a hole in the roof, is it safe? No, it's not safe for me because environmentally I'm exposed now to, lung issues, mold, mildew, all of these things. And so, teasing out what safety means, what poverty means. I think he's done a really great job of also describing that and how it ties into our systems as far as consumerism, classism, gentrification, and the undercurrent of all of it is how we participate in that, either knowingly or unknowingly, right? Like the inaction. So I think that, we all, the point that he makes, like even towards the end of the book, is that we all have a role in this, and how we, can be poverty abolitionists is like, first of all, I'm really excited that somebody like put a name on it. I've heard abolitionists in different ways, but I've never quite heard it described in that way. And I think it's really important to name what it is that we need, what the charge is that we need to do. So I'm going to pause there for a second.
I think that's the other key takeaway that I got from the book as well, is that, we are allowing this to exist. We are allowing for others to live without dignity in the way that we participate or allow the system to function. And I think one of the more specific examples that for me stood out, because I don't have experience with this. I've been privileged not to have to go to a payday lender or have to use check cashing. And the fact that we have, whole communities that are reliant on check cashing places to file anything that they earn, whether it's wages, Social Security, or anything like that, that they all, those check cashing places, they take their cut 1 to 10%. And that's because these communities, these individuals don't have access to traditional banking that many other Americans do. And we allow this kind of cottage industry based off of poverty to exist. Same thing with the payday lenders. you're getting access to cash now, but you're paying a usury charge of up to nearly 400%, and they know this. They're using this against those who need access to quick money, and they take as much as they can in the process, and that stood out to me. I mean, I think it's and you bring up housing as well. Those same banks who aren't offering traditional savings accounts for people also aren't offering them any access to a mortgage loan or any other type of small business loan, because they made a profit decision that said, well, we can make more money elsewhere. We don't need to service these communities. I think it was wild to read about that in more depth and to understand how those systems kind of work underneath what we all understand is the financial institutions that we access daily. We check our bank accounts, whatever. It's eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, it is eye-opening. And I also was thinking about like where he's talking about the methods, like you said, the payday loans, but also there's something a little bit more, what I've seen is there's something a little more like intentional, or I don't know how to say it, but basically like the housing laws themselves, the laws that, they basically put barriers in the way of how to really have affordable and sustainable housing, how to get, how do you take care of your child when you're working for a company that is paying you minimum wage, and why is the minimum wage a living wage? And if you're dealing with barriers to get to and from work because you're just simply not making enough money, and your paycheck, the majority of your 80% of your paycheck is going to cover just a basic shelter. And we're not even talking about the quality of that shelter, right? We're talking about the basic to just have a roof over your head, not the food, not the medical costs, not the childcare, and not the transportation to and from your job that doesn't pay you that much to begin with. And if you live in a climate like ours in upstate New York, we're here in Buffalo, New York, where, just last winter we had a blizzard, and it wasn't just a normal blizzard. It was the worst stateside storm in the continental United States in history. So knowing that we have a climate crisis, it's going to be more and more and more of those types of things. What is the quality of our housing stock? That means that folks are going to be subject to deteriorating indoor air conditioning because we're heavily dependent on fossil fuels for heating, right? And we know it's studied that it causes asthma and all of these different things, but also the quality of heating. Like heating in Buffalo, New York in particular is substandard because of that beautiful but very old housing stock. So how can, I'm thinking of like solutions and things that folks are up against and what we're modeling for. How can we have both beautiful, historically relevant architecture in our neighborhoods, and how can we heat them efficiently and affordably, right? And so that, when all of those things come into place, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm sorry, I'm a little biased, is affordable and sustainable and energy efficient housing. And so, and supportive housing, right? Like, whatever supports that we need to be able to figure out how to encapsulate them into the way we do what we do. We need to put our people that are impacted by this front and center in the governance and in the design process, which is one of the things that we do here at PUSH from the very beginning. They're involved in that design. We keep taking it back from the architects to the urban planners, the city officials. How do we need to do this project? How can it be scaled up? Is it something that can become more cost efficient over time? What investments do we need to make both as people, the everyday person might say, just like he references here, like, what methods can middle and upper class people, do? Well, they're trying to sustain their privileges. And when you think about the gentrification that is happening in these communities, in the communities that we serve, that is one of the ways that it can be countered, is to just simply re-examine how we're doing what we're doing, to re-examine the systems that are designed in a way that doesn't really allow for participation by the community members, right? And so I guess, also taxing or encouraging or incentivizing people who have more to pay into it. For example, corporate polluters should be paying into the remediation of climate issues. And that's an environmental justice issue, but it's also a housing justice issue. It's also a racial issue. So anyways, I'm going to pause there because I can just chat and just take over. I'll pass the mic back to you, Derek.
No, I think you make a lot of great points. And one of the ones that stuck out to me, I was just telling Gretchen prior to the start of our series right now about an article I saw in CBS News. They had Adam, which is a property real estate data company, has done research. They investigated about 575 counties across the United States of America, and they concluded that homes are unaffordable for 99% and 99% of America for most Americans, making an income of about $71,000. And that's not chump change, especially in Buffalo and Utica, though that's a fairly decent income. And yet we are at a place where affordability is at all-time low and there's a massive deficit. I think New York State has a deficit of 615,000 rental units for extremely low income individuals. And so things aren't necessarily getting better. But then you brought up a point as well about not just the cost burden aspect of it, but the fact that there's plenty of money on the table to fix these issues, if we redirected them in ways that better fit the priorities of the war against poverty. When I was reading the book, I initially thought of the limited child tax credit. That the
right.
1 year of child tax credit increased benefit that we received through the American Rescue Plan. Small tweaks to that program reduced childhood poverty by 30% by just giving monthly payments instead of waiting, having families wait until tax season to get their payment. Increasing modestly the payment from $2,000 per kid to $3,600 for a kid under 5, or $3,000 for a kid between 6 and 17, and then also closing loopholes to make sure that Black and Hispanic families actually got their tax benefit. All that, eliminated child poverty by 30%, and it's just a simple thing that the federal government can do at any point in time. It's just as long as they make that their priority. But I think he brings in so many different examples of how we give back federally, locally to communities that have or better off. Obviously, he brings in the mortgage interest deduction that most homeowners get every year when they file their taxes, and how large of a sum of money that is. The federal government just grants back to homeowners. That if we had divvied it up in a different way, could potentially alleviate the affordable housing crisis altogether. It is. I think that's just another point I want to bring up, and one of the takeaways I had is that the money's there federally for us to tackle this issue. It's just a matter of will we, do we have the will to do this, the political will to do this.
Yeah, and not only you make excellent points. Not only is the issue or could the solutions be at the federal level, but they can also be, I read a lot of Adrienne Marie Brown too. Sorry. Sorry, Desmond. I read a lot. But Adrienne Marie Brown has this quote where she says, "The small is all," right? And based on what I've read in this and conversations I've had, there's also opportunities that we're missing. Fractally, right? Like, it seems like such a huge thing to think about federal funds coming to support communities in a way that, kind of trickles down. But what can be done at the state level? What can be done at the city and county level? What can be done within the municipalities that we live in to change the policies and laws that will provide those reliefs? So it feels like, what is it, the Russian dolls, where it's one thing inside of the other thing inside of the other thing. It feels like there's so many ways that we, can tackle it. In a lot of ways, we are, right? Like, I think Ithaca has implemented some inclusionary zoning right? And there's examples and models. And I think what we have shown and what we can continue to show is that the examples that are lifted here, by incentivizing, the the wealth, and the wealthy to do what they need to do, and also, taxing when we need to. And let's, talk about welfare. It's not just the poor people on welfare and the bootstrap mentality that we have to tackle, but it's also how we're looking at policy implementation and funding to actually make the laws that we have on the books real. First thing I'm going to think about is, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was codified into law in New York State, which would address a host of things that we could do right here in New York State right now, and that we have shown improved even in, cities like yours, cities like mine, that we can do these things right now, and we can also scale them up if we, have inspired leadership that will get on board with it and make sure that it is funded properly. So we're talking about wealth, generational wealth opportunities, home ownership for people who can afford it. And also, he mentioned, what are the solutions? Oh, is it just, including people and desegregating, or more housing projects? I think there's multiple ways you can look at it, but I also like the idea of cooperative housing models. I like the idea of providing different mechanisms to address a problem that has been ongoing for so long. It's going to take us a long time to climb out of it, but we have some immediate solutions that we can replicate right here and right now.
Yeah, the top of my notes as I was reading through it is opportunities and options. I think that's he talks about that over and over again, is the fact that people are often, especially those in poverty, have very, very, very limited options of what they can do, if any options. They are given one pathway in which they can follow, and that doesn't help them get out of poverty. It more so reinforces it. And how can we as practitioners and people working in these communities create more opportunities and create more options so that people can get out? And you brought up inclusionary zoning is a great one. In Utica, we didn't go as far as inclusionary zoning. I wanted to, but we did adopt a new zoning code a couple of years back that allowed for accessory dwelling units, which I've talked to you before about, and the fact that we wanted to allow in our single family districts the ability to build in more housing units. Not necessarily changing the character of the neighborhood, as so many people would be afraid to do, but allowing for more units to be built so that you can have in-laws or parents age in place without having to go into costly senior living facilities. And that is at least a way to increase the amount of housing stock we have, the units available, without being too costly overall. We also we reduced the lot size you need to build a new house. So you can build a house on a smaller lot than needing to have two massive lots in the single family district to build a new construction, because we also see that things in Utica don't really get built all too often. Like Buffalo, we have very, very old housing stock. I think 90% was built pre-1920, so we're talking historic.
Yeah.
So how can we incentivize, how can we make it easier, more affordable for folks to build housing, and not just folks, but nonprofits looking to build that first time home buyer home? It's not going to be the big mansion. It's going to be a more modest, maybe 500 square foot, 1,000 square foot home that somebody can actually afford to buy and live in and maintain, because home ownership comes, just like car ownership comes, with a lot of responsibilities that you might not be prepared for, and might not be the best for everybody. So yeah, I mean, there are tons of implementations and different interventions we can utilize locally, and we have so many case studies now. There's so much data. We are more connected now, obviously, than ever before. We can see what's going on anywhere in the world, and we can try and understand how it worked, how it didn't work, what can we improve. I mean, I looked at Buffalo's Unified Development Ordinance as a case study for our zoning code in Utica. What can we pull from Buffalo? What are they doing as such a similar community to Utica that we could utilize and hopefully bring in more opportunity, again, more options for folks? Because the city of Utica's population is 40% in poverty. So it's a pervasive issue in the city, and it's something that we have to address with everything we do.
Absolutely, I agree more. I couldn't agree more. I Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I think we said it all. I just, really think that we can be very creative. If we have, if we always center one point, I think that he was making in I don't know, I think it was chapter 7, investing in ending poverty and how to actually no, it wasn't. It was in chapter 8, empowering the poor, and then chapter 9, kind of tearing down like the barriers. So really at the front and center of, I think, these issues, again, I'm going to always be an advocate for listening to, we have enough case studies, as you said, listening to, having the studies that support the voices of the people will always give us the solutions, and we'll be able to do things right, and duplicating the things that we have done right will allow us to expand them more. So I'll just stop there, and we can maybe talk.
And I want to go back to what Gretchen mentioned about siloing, and how we do look at poverty as we kind of look at it as a single issue. Like, how can we tackle this one thing? And we talked about this prior. The fact that I think a lot of communities, I'll speak for Buffalo. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we both see our school districts as something that needs improvement. Our inner city school districts, that if we could just, I think the conversation in Utica has been for too long. If we could just fix the school district, if we could just get it better resourced, if we can just get more state funding and aid to the school district, it's going to turn everything around. Like, that is the silver bullet in which we can turn Utica's fortunes around. We could not only lift our kids out of poverty with good education, but we can also attract well-to-do families in with a top school that's graded highest among U.S. News or whoever grades schools, right? But Desmond points out, and I think it's on page 164, that a well-resourced high poverty school doesn't actually create the better outcomes for students, if that's what we're trying to do. Against their peers who went to maybe less resourced but low poverty schools, they did worse. And the fact is that integration is really a key to successful outcomes and raising everybody up. It doesn't negatively impact the communities that have, but it does benefit those who don't. And it's that integration. We see it, Desmond points out, we see it in this school research study, but HUD did the same program with Section 8 housing choice vouchers. They offered vouchers to individuals, and they had them specifically go into well-off neighborhoods and neighborhoods of opportunity. And they found that their life outcomes, some 10, 15 years down the road, were much better. They had better jobs. They had higher incomes. They just had overall better quality of life. And we see that we think that we can just fix this one issue, but then we kind of ignore all the rest of the problems. Like, a well-resourced school in a high poverty area doesn't help a student, defeat hunger outside of school. Doesn't prevent a student from getting exposure to lead poisoning or environmental poisoning if the neighborhood or the community is near an industrial site. So there's all these other extras that we really do need to have a holistic look. It's not just the school district, right? It's everything from that child's house to the school and in between that we need to take care of in order to lift them up.
Exactly. And I think that holistic approach is the solution. That holistic approach is the cry of the poor. It's the cry of the people, right? Like, we learn from many stories throughout this book, and just other examples, like that folks, you give up your one child to the system so that you can take care of the rest of your family, and then you're faced with another barrier, and it's a constant hurdle because you're only dealing with one issue at a time. And we do have to be careful with how we tackle these problems, because even as Desmond is lifting up these things and these potential solutions and these examples, we're seeing things happen in real time, like, even in Buffalo right now, right? Like, with our projects over the last 17 years, we have transformed our neighborhood based on our holistic community-based approach. However, with more money, more problems, right? So we transformed our neighborhoods, yet we have increased our tax base for homeowners that are around, and they cry and complain about that. And then we have the attraction of now what is a vibrant, robust, this is one of the most densely populated communities of Buffalo. And what that presents us with is, how do we deal with the issues of now relieving the tax burden, now relieving the utility burden of heating your home? How do we deal with the housing crisis of, for folks who are refugees, coming into this city, both for, political reasons and climate reasons, right? So we have new problems that come along with this. And unless you can adopt a holistic approach, you're going to constantly be, up against different things, right? And another example is like in Liberty Square, I think in Miami, Florida. They're facing like an environmental issue with their shoreline degrading because the water is rising above sea level. Then you have this one tiny little community that grew into like a Black neighborhood based on a housing project, and now they're facing gentrification. And the solution for making their living conditions better was, hey, we're going to integrate, and we're going to issue some Section 8 vouchers to all of y'all, and you'll be able to live in your same home. And we've seen this time and time again with housing projects throughout the United States, where folks are subject to the developer and the city officials, coming up with these solutions, and they're not considering the people who are in them. And so, yeah, you're solving one problem, and now you've displaced 60% of your population, right? And what does that do to, again, going back to the dignity of a community that already suffered redlining, disinvestment, displacement, poverty? It all comes back down to that. And it all comes back down to the voice, having a voice and being a participant, an active participant in the fabric of our communities, no matter whether you're, a working class poor person, no matter if you're a middle class person, no matter if you're, a wealthy individual. We all stand to gain or lose by our action or inaction, right? And so that's the case that I think he's made throughout the book. We have to be active participants in the solutions, and some of the solutions are already here. We just have to kind of pick it up and play in the sand with it a little bit.
Right, you bring up a point, your Miami or your Florida example, that actually harkens back to our first speaker series book, The Great Displacement by Jake Biddle, and the fact that when these communities face environmental disasters and the climate crisis, often resources are then they come in usually a little late, a little slowly, but those resources are limited, and they're usually limited to where is the tax base the strongest, because we want to maintain those areas of our community. And oftentimes the other areas that aren't a strong tax base, the impoverished areas, the Black areas, the Hispanic areas, are the ones that are lost, or just left to be reclaimed by the planet at some point in time. And so I think that's just very poignant. And I wanted to shout out, of course, Jake Biddle's book as well. I think you're right. I think as far as government, how we operate, I think local governments particularly have to reassess everything we do. I think we did a bit of that during the pandemic. We had no other choice.
Exactly.
But I think we have to continue to build off of that. How do we conduct our public meetings? How do we conduct our community engagement? In the city of Utica, when the pandemic hit, we were allowed to live stream our public meetings. The state gave us the authority to do that, and that was open meetings law that followed the rules, but we actually kept on with that, and we now stream our public meetings on our YouTube page consistently. So it's a way at least to provide access to folks who can't make it to City Hall, but do want to stay engaged. But can we do more? Can we allow engagement from folks who are watching online instead of just being observers of the meeting? How do we handle public engagement as far as surveys go? Do we just publish a survey in English online and call it a day? Or do we put it into multiple languages, into multiple formats? Do we offer facilitation? Do we sit down with folks and actually fill out the survey with them? Or do we go to the community and meet them where they're at? Do we go to the libraries? Do we go to the churches? Do we go to the food pantries? I mean, these things are going to necessitate we have a conversation about when is government actually open, right?
Right.
It's not, if it's always 8 to 4 or 8:30 to 4:30, well, it's very limited. Maybe we need to reconsider, okay, maybe we have government functioning on the weekend so we can actually access communities that need to have their voices heard more regularly. We need to
Right.
go.
And how do we partner with each other, right? Like, I think there's an opportunity that we recognized here at Push, and that was really, again, my sandbox reference. I love being able to play in the sandbox with those, and really doing what we do best, and then partnering with people who do what they do best. So partnerships between government and community-based organizations like ours, right? That's a good way to meet the people where you are and have effective governance where you're not recreating the wheel. There's access there. And how are we engaging with academia? Like, for example, like for us, we don't do any of this work alone, right? We consider ourselves partners, allies, and with the community and with our other, with other folks who are doing good work, and how can we do it even better, right? So when we look to figure out how can we design the most efficient house possible and make it affordable, one of the first partners that we found was our School of Architecture at UB, right? And it was like, oh my God, we had this opportunity to interact with academia in a way that will help us have passive, begin to have passive house certifications for the students, but also provide like real opportunity in real time for our internal planners and designers to build these homes with communities. So I think there's just so many opportunities for us to partner with each other and not recreate the wheel.
I love that you brought up the house project you did with U Albany, because that was actually something, or U Buffalo. That was actually something that they showed me when I went on campus to visit, as I was choosing between University of Buffalo or SUNY Albany for my master's. And like, this is an awesome, in-person experiment on passive housing and how you can build that out. I think one of the things I want to bring up out of the book that I found, I mean, it made me laugh reading it, but I think it's an obvious solution that we just don't think about often, is how are we marketing what programs we do actually have and offering to folks. He brings the example of there was a market increase in people getting their earned income tax credits just based off of better marketing materials that use a larger, more readable font size. And that's to me, I mean, it's
laughable, but it's real, right?
It's just it's a small thing that we can do with awareness and educational campaigns. Like it's not going to cost anything for a municipality or a nonprofit organization to just print a larger font size to allow folks to actually be able to see what's being offered to them and access that.
Yeah, well, it's really funny that you mentioned that. I was just on a call with NYSERDA. We're part of the Energy Equity Committee, and one of the things that we, kind of collectively said, well, this has been a problem for a long time, and it was just such a simple fix that all the folks in the room had, was that, like, how are we distributing information, and how can government, do it a little bit better, not only with like higher, bigger fonts and, different languages, but simple things like infographics, how to making the language more digestible, not necessarily, dumbing the language down, but really, do you need 3 legalese words to say one thing, to say something that you could have said with 1 word? And, just having maybe a community-based advisor, someone that can read something and say, this is not, no one's going to understand this. But that's a really great point. And it is laughable, but it's such a huge barrier.
Dawn and Derek, I just wanted to make sure that you have seen the comment in the chat, and if not, I can save it for you. But it's about both of your references to historic housing stock in your respective cities of Buffalo and Utica. And so the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which helps set federal policy and regulations, is currently inviting comments on a draft statement around preservation and affordable housing. And so the link is in the chat, where you can go and offer input. But in the few minutes that we have left, I wanted to step away for a moment from the book specifically and more around New York State. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, the poverty rate in New York State increased year on year, 22, 21. And so in terms of making progress in alleviating poverty and all of the issues that are involved in that in 2023 and 2024, so really kind of immediate action, what are some ways that we can remove some of those barriers now? So you mentioned bigger font size, and that's an easy fix. And so there you go. But are there things that you haven't mentioned tonight in this conversation yet that you see as big barriers to the work that you do? And that whether it's realistic or not, if that barrier could be taken away, it would really make a huge difference in our ability to really systemically address poverty and all of its very interwoven issues.
I would say two things that would make, to me, I think would make a major difference for Utica, but I think across New York State, and that would be access to safe, healthy, and affordable housing and higher paying jobs. And I say those two because we actually did a housing study in the city recently. And one of the key takeaways from the Utica housing study was that it's not really the cost of housing that's too high, like it is in other areas of the country, especially out west. But the affordability challenges in Utica are really the result of very low incomes and not high housing costs. And I don't have an actionable step like here, this is how we're going to get higher, paying jobs to the area. But I think there are mechanisms in which local governments can use, we always use pilots as an incentive for developers to come into town. Usually they range from 10 to 30 years, giving a pretty decent tax break to job creators. And how do we then ratchet it up so that you're not just a job creator, you're a high paying job creator, so that people that are getting these jobs can then access good housing. But also we need to just build more housing. I think the other piece of the puzzle for Utica was nothing really got built in the city that without subsidy, whether it was high-end market rate loft apartments or affordable housing. Because the government doesn't do public housing anymore itself, we rely so much on low-income housing tax credits that we get from New York State Homes and Community Renewal. And that is really the driver of affordable developments. And then for the market rate apartments, that is really, they like to utilize state historic tax credits. So when we're talking about preservation and so forth, that's a piece of it too. And without those two mechanisms, we're not really seeing any growth in housing stock. And we desperately need it. The city, unlike suburbs, don't have a lot of land. You can't build new utilities. Our infrastructure is over 100 and something years old. And so how can we develop new housing and attract more people to live, but also make sure that they're getting quality housing stock, quality places to live, healthy places to live, and a better job altogether?
I can agree with you more, Derek. Housing and wages are like front and center, but I do think there's nuance in how affordable housing is done and how it's done well. And I do think that our local and state officials have some serious skin in the game, and they have to take an active role in slowing down the incentivizing of for-profit developers taking on development in the city. I think that is a major problem. That's a major hurdle. And so, yes to more housing. Yes to more affordable, sustainable, and supportive housing. That's what we need, because you can't, again, fix one problem without fixing some of the others, or addressing the root causes of why people are displaced and dehoused, so to speak. Like in the city of Buffalo, yes, poverty, the wages are definitely part of it. But what we're seeing is just a rapid increase in our population. For the first time in more than 50 years, I think Buffalo is now seeing a population increase. And that renaissance means a lot to our urban planners, to our city, right? It means a lot to us as residents, but for people who are displaced every day and subject to, subpar housing, it means, oh my goodness, I'm going to be displaced again because we have folks who are coming into the area, and it's more popular to raise the rents on subpar housing than it is to actually repair them and to house the people who have lived in their respective areas for decades, right? And so I think, again, the lawmakers have some skin in the game to slow that down and also remove the barriers from affordable housing developers. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to say it. In New York State, we have really, we're subject to the affordable housing development, the low income tax credits, and how these deals are structured are incredibly complicated. They involve a lot of people who see a lot of benefit, but the timing between our community planning process, design, fundraising, and then building the thing with or without MWBE, WBE contractors is problematic. It has to be, again, it has to be holistic. We need to be hiring people who are from and of the community on our affordable housing development projects, but we need those barriers removed within the affordable housing development laws, in order, state laws and federal laws, to really demystify like why that's even happening in the first place. Why do we have to jump through these hoops if we have proven pilots that work, if we have models that work, why are we not using those? And to the workforce question, we have a lot of emerging technology, a lot of things that are happening in our workforce that some people have benefit to, but others don't. Green construction. Why are we not preparing our workforce for what's to come? We know we have to end our dependence on fossil fuels. Why are we not preparing them? One of the things that we're experimenting with right now is how to prepare a sustainable workforce that is from and of the community, a BIPOC sustainable workforce. And it can happen because we've done it on our projects before. We can put our people to work on our projects at living wage, prevailing wage, and they have dignity when they're working for their own community on their own projects that they might even live in. So that's the circular economy. That's how we generate wealth and how we continue to move forward and we expand those models.
I'm right there with you as far as the affordable housing development. We have one project in particular, which you may be familiar with, ArtSpace, which I think they have a project in Buffalo, but they're a low income affordable housing unit developer that's actually targeted towards artists and creators. But we've been in the process with them for, I want to say, almost a decade. It's long and arduous, and you're right. There's too much time between planning and actually groundbreaking.
It is. It's a lot, and I think creative people from and of the community come up with really great solutions, and they do things that people said they could never be done. We were told that, hey, y'all are crazy for thinking you can build an affordable housing development project, and it's been hard. It's been complicated. It's been all the things, but as people get adjusted to these types of models being, that they're able to be replicated, then maybe more people will be able to figure out how to remove the barriers so we can do them, across the state.
So we are at 1 minute before 6:30, and I can't thank you enough to both of you, and I could listen to you for the rest of the evening. And so I appreciate so much sharing all of your views, all of your work that you're involved with and the relevancy to it and how that has connected to the book that we've been talking about, but just really all the great work you're doing for your communities. And I know we've talked about this earlier, but poverty, when you say that word, it's just so weighty and sad. And so if you could both just briefly, what is it about the work that you do that is really giving you hope that we can rise above and lift everyone up in the state, in the country? We'll leave it state and country for now, in our communities. What gives you hope every day?
I think I'll go back to the fact that we have all the tools in the toolkit. I think now we have a better understanding too. I think the conversation's a lot different than it was 10, 20, especially 40 years ago. It's laid bare before us, especially with the pandemic, what types of issues and how pervasive and just how interwoven and I mean, a little weighty, this problem is, but you need to be able to see it for what it is so that you can actually then try and attack it and fix it. But we have so many tools, as speaking as a practitioner in planning, whether your expertise or your field is a specific area, whether it's housing or transportation or environmental planning, all those different avenues and fields have the toolkits, and then we have the knowledge in which we can make more equitable communities and healthier communities and communities that will alleviate poverty. We know how to create more affordable housing. We know how to make roads safer for all people and all abilities, whether they're looking to walk, ride a bike, or drive. Environmentally, we understand you can't place housing development next to an industrial site. We know how to better buffer these uses, better make ensure safety. So we have the tools. It's more of the willingness and the political will to get it done, because urban planning is in the realm of politics. That is always going to be a piece of it. There's always going to be pushback community against other communities, and the haves versus the have-nots, or the deserving versus those who are thought to be undeserving. But we as practitioners, we can bridge that gap by talking with these different communities and finding that common ground. Like I mentioned to you all before, the fact is that the pervasiveness of poverty is just growing larger. I bring up that CBS News article because it is affecting more and more of us every day. Things are becoming more and more unaffordable for all of us. We've lost so many public goods, whether it be transportation, our housing, our public education's constantly now competing with private schools and charter schools, and all these things benefit all of us. They're a web of things that help us, not from necessarily falling on hard times, but being able to get back up. And these things have been removed kind of piecemeal, and those rungs have been removed. But we know how to put them back. We know what works. We've seen it over the course of 100 and so odd years of trying to wage a war against poverty. We know how to address these issues, and we can. It's just a matter of, are we going to do it? Is there the will to do it?
Nice, that's great. I'll try to be quick. I think seeing the ability to see ourselves and others, just remembering our own humanity is like front and center. And really simply for me, what keeps me going at the end of the day is results and the conversations that I have with the people. Just the other day, we were giving a tour and we ran into one of our residents, totally unscripted. And they're like, y'all are with Push, yeah? Thank you so much. And if there's any way that I can contribute, then I would love to be a participant in, having more housing. Now, this is a tenant that has been in one of our newer units for 2 years. And they are excited about participating with the organization, being an active, productive member of their community, but also not in terms of charity giving back, but in terms of solidarity and really recognizing that I'm a part of this and I see that y'all are a part of this, and I want to spread the word, and I want to get other people involved and share the good news that there is a solution, and that even though it seems like nobody's coming to save us, we can figure out the solutions here at the community level and advocate for ourselves.
Thank you. So thank you both again so much for your time and all of your thoughtfulness and all of the work that you do in your communities every day. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. You can register at christoffersoncenter.org for upcoming events, and we hope to see you at another event soon in the future. So thanks, Dawn, Derek, and good night, everyone.
Thank you, and you're welcome to come visit anytime.